And this is my contribution. So I'll talk about a fairly familiar view of meaning, language, and consciousness, and then a perhaps less familiar view as an alternative. And then I'll apply that to large language models where I'll argue that they don't understand and they're not conscious. But despite that, I think that they are joint actors with us. And so I'll describe how that goes. So meaning, language, and consciousness are often taken to be inextricably linked. The first link between meaning and consciousness was forged by Descartes. Though I can doubt the world, my body, and even the truths of mathematics, I cannot doubt that I'm thinking. That is, while I'm conscious of the thoughts and perceptions, I exist. If all we can know with certainty is the content of our own minds, then the mind must be the source and ultimate ground of meaning. Descartes, of course, had God to help him establish the truth of his ideas. Frege needed a source of truth more appropriate for logic. He recognized that conscious ideas were private. Each of us has our own experience of, say, a yellow banana that may or may not match another person's experience. It would be a mistake to talk about my idea of the yellow banana as either true or false, since the ideas of one person cannot be compared to the ideas of another person, and no ideas can be compared to things. Here's Frege's masterful demolition of the correspondence theory of truth, interpreted as the correspondence between ideas and the things they represent. It would only be possible to compare an idea with a thing if the thing were an idea too. And then if the first did correspond perfectly with the second, they would coincide. But this is not at all what people intend when they define truth as the correspondence of an idea with something real. For in this case, it is essential precisely that the reality shall be distinct from the idea. But then there can be no complete correspondence, no complete truth. So nothing at all would be true. For what is only half true is untrue. For truth to be complete, according to Frege, a new link between meaning and language needed to be forged. He argued that truth properly applies to the meaning of a sentence, such as the banana is yellow, rather than as correspondence between the idea and the thing. The sentence expresses the meaning that may be true or false. Either the banana is, for all time, truly yellow, or it's not. This is the sort of truth a logician can use. Having secured truth, Frege was left the strange realm of meanings, which were not ideas, nor were they things. And here's Frege on this problem. Anything belonging to this realm has it in common with ideas, that it cannot be perceived by the senses, but it has in common with things that it does not need an owner so as to belong to the contents of its consciousness. A conscious mind can grasp meaning when it, quote, becomes clothed in the perceptible garb of a sentence. But strictly speaking, meaning remains independent of any mind, indeed of any sentence that expresses it. The value of the perceptible garb of sentences is that they help us use meanings to act, to think, to help us use meanings to act, to think, to judge, to communicate. When meaning is grasped by the conscious mind, the thinker can express that meaning in language. No, that's still, all right. The triad of meaning, language, and consciousness is united. Okay, so now on to Millikan's alternative. The consumer semantics proposed by Millikan breaks every link in this chain of ideas. First, consciousness is unconnected to meaning. And here's Millikan. The problem of understanding intentionality can and should be divorced from the problem of understanding consciousness. This is done by abandoning the traditional epistemic view of consciousness, by giving up the rationalist view of meaning and intentionality. Intentionality is not harbored within consciousness, nor can consciousness, in the guise of a priori reflection, provide an affidavit for the genuine intentionality of seeming thoughts, end quote. Intentionality, or meaning, as I am rather cavalierly calling it, is determined by the conditions under which it has served a function. Meaning is determined by what it does, not by how it appears before the conscious mind. To be more precise, for an item to be meaningful, is for it to be used as a representation within a system. A representational system might be contained inside a person's head, but it might be an entirely public system of relations. According to Millikan, an item acquires the function of representation when a system has some use for specifying a relationship between that item and what it represents. That is, there is some explanation for the representation being produced, which accounts for its continued reproduction. The devices that use a representational relationship are called consumers. A public system example is a beaver splash that means danger. The consumers of the splash are beavers that hear it and respond by running away or hiding. The splash represents danger because the relationship between the splash and danger explains the value of the beaver response. Splashes will continue to be produced in the event of danger as long as the beaver consumers of the signal continue to respond. Of course, splashes may be produced in the absence of danger, and beavers may fail to respond to splashes. The point is that the effectiveness of the beaver response depends on the relationship between splash and danger. Beaver to beaver signaling highlights the importance of the system of representation in Millikan's account. Two cooperating functions are needed to get representations to work. The consumer function is what makes use of the representation in some way. The beaver consumers need to get away from danger and use the splash to accomplish that function. The producer function is to get a representation to map onto what it represents so that the consumer can perform its function. When splash is mapped to danger, beavers can successfully run from danger. For the system to function, both parts need to coordinate with each other. It's no good for a beaver to splash in relation to danger in some place or time other than where and when the danger is. The relations that govern a system must vary in accord with one another for the system to function properly. But it's important to note that the system only needs to function properly often enough for the representation to be reproduced, not often or even average. Because the relationships that determine meaning are not necessarily in a person's head, the relationships that determine linguistic meaning need not be in the head either. The meaning of a sentence or other linguistic device is determined by the function that explains its survival and proliferation. For example, the sentence, "The banana is yellow," could be used in numerous ways, but its survival as an indicative sentence rests on its ability to map appropriately to the world. Banana maps onto bananas, yellow maps onto the color yellow, and is maps yellow onto the banana. The speaker doesn't have to grasp the meaning of banana or yellow in order for the words to serve their mapping function. The words serve this function because past consumers of the words have fulfilled their functions due to the mapping relation. As travelers know well, a person doesn't have to understand the meaning of words to use them effectively. The trick is to know what they do. As long as the language continues to serve the needs of those who use it, the particular mental state of the speaker is irrelevant. So large language models, finally. LLMs are particularly troubling examples of the way consciousness, meaning, and language come apart. LLMs produce what seem like language, but the source and method of language production are radically different from human language production. If the Frege view is true, and LLMs truly produce language, then language indicates a mind that consciously grasps meaning, and therefore LLMs must be conscious. On the other hand, if LLMs are sophisticated forms of computer software rather than conscious minds, then it seems that the language they produce can't be meaningful on the Fregean tripartite system. Recognizing the independence of language, meaning, and consciousness dispels this dilemma. LLMs do indeed produce meaningful language. That is, language meaningful to humans. The LLM itself does not mean what it says because it has no use for its words. Humans are the consumers of LLM speech. As another student of Millikan, Kaya Mitra,
pointed out to me. We are the ones that have shaped the training algorithms, and we are the ones that reproduce the LLM representations when they fulfill our needs. LLMs produce all kinds of language, random bits, redundant bits, and meaningful bits. The random and redundant productions disappear. The eerily meaningful bits proliferate widely. Importantly, the meaningful bits proliferate for roughly the same reasons that language productions from other humans proliferate. The words continue to fulfill their mapping functions despite the unusual mode of production. When an LLM says the banana is yellow, the word banana continues to map onto bananas, yellow continues to map onto the color yellow. The key difference between the LLM and the human who utters the sentence is that the LLM doesn't care what the sentence means or if it means anything at all. And here we have computational linguist Emily Bender, who appeared earlier in Ned's talk, and her idea of stochastic parrots, which has been a theme. So Emily Bender called LLM stochastic parrots because they mimic the statistical patterns of language without understanding what they say. In the New York Magazine profile of Bender, Elizabeth Weil describes LLMs as, quote, beguiling, amoral, and the Platonic ideal of the bullshitter, as philosopher Harry Frankfurt, author of On Bullshit, defined the term. Bullshitters, Frankfurt argued, are worse than liars. They don't care whether something is true or false. They care only about rhetorical power, if a listener or reader is persuaded, end quote. I would only amend this to note that LLMs don't care about rhetorical power either. They don't care about anything. And because they don't care about the truth, they do produce bullshit. Truth, or in Millikan terms, fulfilling the stabilizing proper function, is essential for language to continue to be useful. Too much bullshit destroys meaning, as social media daily underscores. The counter to Bender's critique of LLMs is that the production of words creates its own meaning. In my favorite quote from the New York article, Christopher Manning argues that reference is unnecessary to meaning. He says worries about reference are, quote, a sort of standard 20th century philosophy of language argument. Instead, he proposes distributional semantics. This is Manning quote. Oh, and you can follow along. I've sort of quoted from Manning and from the Weil quote, so I've sort of mixed back and forth with that. So he proposes distributional semantics. The meaning of a word is simply a description of the context in which it appears. When Weil asked Manning how he defines meaning, he said, honestly, I think it's difficult. LLMs process billions of words, Weil says. The technology ushers in a phase shift. And here's Manning again. You know, humans discovered metalworking, and that was amazing. Then hundreds of years passed. Then humans worked out how to harness steam power. We're in a similar moment with language. LLMs are sufficiently revolutionary to alter our understanding of language itself. To me, Manning said, this isn't a very formal argument. This just sort of manifests. It just hits you. What hit me about this quote was the dismissal of the 20th century debate about meaning. While it's unfair to assess Manning's distributional semantics on the basis of this vague remark, it is fair to demand a theory about what meaning is and what grounds it. A clear theory of meaning will be essential to understanding whether artificial intelligence is, in fact, intelligent. Bender, for her part, suggests we stop using the term artificial intelligence. The tendency to ascribe human qualities to anything that resembles us is too great a danger regarding a system that mimics us so well. Instead, she recommends the term systematic approaches to learning algorithms and machine inferences. With the new acronym, people would be less inclined to suggest that the salami is conscious. Though my field is consciousness theory, I don't feel that I even need to argue that the salami is not conscious. The only reason I can think that anyone would imagine an LLM is conscious is that its language imitates the reports of conscious humans. Because the argument from analogy has been the main source of an inference to other minds, and subjective report has been the gold standard for evidence of consciousness, salamis that produce reports about their supposed beliefs and feelings seem to provide compelling proof of their consciousness. No one imagines that a recording device or even iPhone Siri is conscious because we understand how machines can reproduce language in programmed ways. Few of us understand how salamis produce language or even how humans learn to do it. In the absence of an alternative source, the argument from analogy kicks in, and we infer that salamis are sincerely reporting the contents of their conscious minds. But this is bullshit. The language that LLMs produce is meaningful to human consumers, but not to the devices themselves. As Bender says, they are stochastic parrots. Humans account for the production and reproduction of LLM speech. LLMs have no use for it. One interesting question is what would need to be added to an LLM to count as a use of its own. And I was happy to see that this discussion was begun in the previous talk. Without any biological needs to satisfy, is there any possible value to the machine for adapting its words and sentences to conditions in the world? Since the algorithm is designed to adapt the linguistic output to demands of human users, the program will presumably continue to improve in fulfilling this function. Will the evolution of LLMs in the human linguistic environment eventually be sufficient to make their language production meaningful? To me, this is the fundamental question for assessing artificial intelligence. And as far as I can tell, it is rarely asked by designers. And I've been pleased to see that this is starting to be asked now, but this is really fairly recent, asking this question about goals for the machine. What is it for the machine to want or have a goal? But up to this point, Alan Turing's imitation game has been the predominant test of intelligence. The goal is to produce a machine that can imitate what humans do and how humans do it. But if Millikan is right, and language and thought are biological categories, the non-biological systems can only imitate what humans do. I'm not saying that artificial systems can't produce language. I've already noted that LLMs do produce meaningful language for human interpreters. Since LLMs do not use the language they produce, however, they do not understand it. They are not interpreters of their own language. Could they be? What would robot language involve? Luke Steels has pioneered a Wittgensteinian approach to robot language learning that may point to an answer. Robots are programmed with cognitive skills such as goals, perception, and action. They then play a game, like the naming game, to communicate. For example, there might be 5 objects and 5 names, with the goal of agreeing on a unique name for each object. Through actions like pointing and signaling agreement and disagreement, the robots eventually settle on a vocabulary for their small world. Here there seems a better claim that the robots are using each name to mean the particular object that the name refers to. Perhaps there's an even stronger claim in games where a robot is taught the object names by a human and then teaches the name to the other robot. Still, I wonder if pre-programmed goals are sufficient to ground understanding. How sophisticated could programmed goals be and still count as goals for the system? Goals to better identify or manipulate an object may be basic enough. What about a goal to improve its understanding or behave ethically? Putting aside the problem of whether goals like this could be programmed, would the goal be a goal for the robot? Human goals are biological, rooted in the ground of life. As Evan Thompson has argued, even the lowly cell has an inside and outside. It needs to maintain itself in its environment through its ability to absorb nutrients. At higher levels of complexity, systems of self-maintenance develop to include pain and pleasure, as well as varieties of emotional valence. Goals of language learning and successful use arise out of these evaluative systems. Machine goals are artificial, derived from human goals. LLMs like ChatGPT are explicit about this. Users are asked to provide feedback on the system to make it more useful for dialogue with humans. If consumer semantics is right, that the functions of the consumer determine the meaning of the linguistic device, then human consumers determine the meaning of LLM speech, as I noted earlier. The question for genuine machine language is what would substitute for biological survival in grounding machine goals? What would turn a machine into a language consumer rather than just a language producer? And just for the record, I don't have an answer to that question, so maybe during the discussion we can think of one. So far, I've focused on the nature of the language produced by the LLMs and whether it indicates a mind or consciousness. I've argued that LLMs do indeed produce language, even though the system does not understand what it's saying. This may suggest that an LLM is a mere tool and not a participant in the production of language, that it may be as inappropriate to say the LLM is speaking as to say that an audio recording is singing. Such a conclusion would underestimate the role of technology in shaping meaning. Even though human goals determine meaning, the introduction of technology shifts goals in various ways. Say I have a goal to think about AI consciousness. Depending on the type of technology available, that goal will change in various ways as I pursue it. Books or other printed material shape my ideas in response to others who have thought about the same question. Asking ChatGPT whether it is conscious shapes my ideas in different ways. My relationship to the technology changes, and my goals change with the shift in relations. Bruno Latour recognized the ways technology transforms action by interfering with the execution of goals. In the absence of technology, my thoughts about AI consciousness wander about in a more or less organized way in my mind. With books, my goal shifts to learn the views of others. With ChatGPT, my goal shifts to exchange ideas with the machine itself. Because technology mediates between a person and her goal, Latour argues that it constitutes a joint agent. Seeing static objects like books as agents clarifies the power and limitation of dynamic systems like LLMs to function as agents. There's no doubt that they have the potential to significantly interfere with our goals, as the panic at the introduction of ChatGPT attests. In a bit, I'll say more about the disruptive power of AI as the real threat from LLMs. Still, technology has always functioned as a joint agent with humans in its mediation of our goals. LLMs are a difference of degree, not of kind. The limitation of technology as a joint agent is precisely the point I've been making throughout. It doesn't understand what it's doing. Its interference is not intentional in either sense of the word. Consequently, humans imagine that we have entire control over technology. The presumed dichotomy between technology as a mere tool and as a joint agent demonstrates the tendency to think that humans choose how we use our technology. While human goals generate and reproduce technology, this teleological influence does not guarantee that technology will contribute to a more global teleology of moral or social well-being, any more than natural selection guarantees optimal functioning of a species. We and our technology adapt to environmental conditions, and there's no reason to think that adaptations to a toxic environment are going to be good in any holistic sense. And that brings us to the toxic environment in which AI is adapting. The primary drivers of AI development are power and profit. Individual developers, no doubt, have many other altruistic motives, such as aiding people with disabilities, saving time and effort, or improving communication. But these are not the reasons that billions are being invested in AI. Power and profit are nothing new and can be the source of genuinely valuable innovations. However, in tandem with the unpredictable ways that AI can shift human goals, the potential for disastrous consequences is frightening. And I've got, a list of some of the dangerous consequences. I think they're all pretty familiar at this point, so I'm not going to go through them all. The point is that we are hurtling towards these consequences with no idea how to stop the technological train. There may be no way to stop it, but we certainly won't be able to stop these consequences or even manage them until we better understand how AI does and does not shape human meaning. Thanks.